going to look into today is how to solder SMD components, which are surface mounted devices, onto PCB printed circuit boards like this. We're going to look into some soldering techniques just to give you guys some confidence into soldering and being able to like quickly get up and running with this, with these tools and skills. So I have a few tools here with me. We're going to look into the soldering iron today. You guys will probably have this kit with you guys. It comes with the soldering iron. It'll come with a bunch of tips like this that you can unscrew and interchange. That's right, super hot right now. So you unscrew this, you remove this, you can replace the tip with a different shaped one. Right now I think I've selected the one that is the thinnest and slimmest because we'll be doing really small soldering. And the other thing that is super important is flux. We have some flux over here. We have some soldering wire. We have a desoldering wick. We have our tweezers. I have like 3 tweezers with me. And then we got our practice PCB board. So as you can see, I've like made a few tutorials before this and got a few components on there. I even got this one on here, but then I had to remove it because there was something wrong with the recording. I'm going to give this one more shot. The other thing that would be good if you have is some rubbing alcohol, and a toothbrush really helps. It's one of my most recent must-haves while you're soldering. Helps clean things up. So we're going to see today how we can get this SMD component onto here that has many legs, and the legs are super small. How can we get it on here without, well, like, how can we clean solder this onto our printed circuit board? So essentially what the circuit board does is that you can see it has like silver plates, and those are the exposed plates where solder will deposit if you apply any with some heat. Everything that is green or light green you cannot solder that. In fact, things that are the traces that are light green, you can scrape them off and you'll find copper underneath them, which is orange in color. So if I keep this here and I can get any one trace, scrape a trace off, some copper will show up underneath it, which is which is the connection between any 2 points, is the copper underneath it. So this is just a hack for you guys if at any point you want to play around with a PCB board and you want a connection somewhere in between 2 components and you can't make a connection here or here, you can scratch off the trace and there's copper underneath it and make a connection right over there. So the solder will always stick to copper, but it won't stick to the green substrate. All right, okay. Let's get on with putting on these SMD components. Where did the other one go? Onto our board. There we go. Dropped it. Let's start off with the small one. So whenever you're working with PCBs, there's always going to be, and PCBs and specifically ICs, you're always going to see that there's a small white dot right there next to any big IC. You can see one here, and you can see one there as well. So what that indicates is the orientation of the IC itself. So this big IC over here will always have a dot on it. Even small ones have a dot on it, and that dot should always align with the dot on the PCB. So we're going to see through that. All right, what you want to start off with doing is scoop out some flux. It's like butter, and apply it onto the silver traces. Don't be too generous because then cleaning up is going to be a challenge, but with some practice you'll know how much to apply in there. I'm just going to show you guys how much I've smeared onto there. Just enough, just like a thin layer of rosin. All right, I'm gonna keep. So the flux does essentially it does many things, but one thing it does right now, like what it's doing right now, is it's holding my piece like gooey, so it it's sticky, so it's holding it in place. So I'm tapping down on it. The other thing it does when I start soldering onto it is that it keeps the solder itself shiny, fresh, stops it from oxidation, and keeps the traces separate from each other. So I'm just moving on to this, making sure each trace has made contact with the board underneath it. As you can see, none of the traces really connected with each other, and that is what flux does. Super helpful. I'm going to do the other side. And you can see, even if I put the whole iron on multiple pins at the same time, the flux is what keeps them separate. And then you can notice, as soon as the flux dries out, the solder becomes a bit more sticky, and then you'll start noticing that it connects close pins with each other. As long as there's rosin in there or there's flux in there, they'll not stick to each other. But as soon as it dries up, you'll notice that the pins start sticking to each other, and you're going to deposit more solder than what is required at the joint. So that's all nice. Let's move on to the big 44 pin IC. Again, same process. I'm gonna scoop out some flux there. So if your board is hot, the flux is gonna melt instantly. It's not a bad thing. It's just so you know that it's there. You don't have to apply more. And all right, let's get our IC on there. Again, the IC is a bit dirty because I had to remove it because of some video problem I got. I wasn't recording. Memory ran out. There we go. Okay, let's align this. Okay, that's all right. And then what we want to do is, whenever we're always try to have a clean iron tip, super helpful. Whenever we have like a big IC like this, you always want to connect a few of its legs down first and then move on to the rest. So with the tweezer, I'm gonna hold down, or moved again. I'm gonna hold down the IC and just solder maybe a few of its legs. One here, one there, one there. And then we're set. And then we can just smear solder over the rest more generously. Let's start here. Oops, that was bad. We have a ton of interconnects. That's what we were talking about. Never panic. There's always a way to fix anything that happens on a soldering board. We'll get to that in a bit. Okay. I think there's a last rule. The flux makes sure that the trace absorbs the perfect amount of solder that it needs to make the joint, and then the rest of it just always remains on the iron. So the way we fix excess solder on any of your pins is with the desoldering wick. And what it does is it's essentially really thin strands of copper, and it acts as a sponge. So as soon as you heat it up, it will soak up any extra copper, any extra solder from your pins onto itself. So let's see if that fixed it. It did. Except for the first one, there's still some in between. Nope, I think it's gone. Let's have a closer look. Yeah, we're all set. So that's, and then once you have, so these are big components. This is how we put on relatively bigger components together, and then inspect and make sure that all connections are there. Just to be sure, I'm going to run these over one more time with some more solder. Oops. Get some off of there. So we have some extra there. Again, soldering wick. Desoldering wick. Soaks it up. We have the right amount now. Okay, let's look at how we can solder some more smaller components, more like SMD components. So I have one here. It's this one. I think it's like 4 resistors. And then we're gonna put it here. So same procedure, get some flux, scoop it onto there, place your component. Clean your soldering iron and hold your part down. There you go. That went well. And some more here. All right, that's that. We got we got good connections. Let's try a resistor or something, or a capacitor. So these orange ones are capacitors and the black ones are resistors. Again, try this capacitor. It's right there. Let's get some flux. Make sure the tip of your Iron is clean. So you all might get a sponge with this, and you want to soak the sponge in a lot of water. And um, yeah. The temperature you want to keep your iron is at usually like about 300, 400 degrees Celsius. You can spend all day making sure they're super straight, and like it's really at least for me it's super therapeutic. You can like make sure it's all nice and straight. Um, the thing with SMD components is removing them is a pain. So if you want to remove this, it's kind of difficult to do it with uh, an iron, but it's not that you can't. If you have to just make sure you're uh, heating up both sides. Let's apply some solder, and then it comes off. Make sure you have your tweezers nearby. Very good. That's how it came off. I don't know where it went. Oh, here it is. Perfect. Not perfect. It's a little crooked, but yeah. So I would recommend you guys get a practice board and just try out these different, how to get these components on there. And then you might also have these multimeters, and these are super handy because there's a mode in which you can set these, which is, you have to look for it. I think it's the buzzer mode. You want to look for this buzzer sound shape, and what it does is that it's basically a connectivity testing mode, so that if there's any kind of connection formed, it makes a sound. This is super helpful because when you want to check that your pin has actually been soldered, you can then make sure that there's proper connection made between any two pins or any two surfaces or points. It also helps you make sure there are no connections between any. If you've joined any two wires and you suspect maybe there's like a hidden solder somewhere behind, you want to make sure that it's not forming any connections. You can use that to get rid of that connection or debug it, find out. The last step would be, once you have all your components on your board, you want to use any old toothbrush and just pour some rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. Just scrub out the extra flux that has been deposited, because more times usually that flux is what causes like faint connections between the wires, and your circuit acts up weirdly. Your LEDs flicker. So it's just good practice to clean up your board with rubbing alcohol. After you're done soldering, everything's nice and clean. Just get all the flux off. There's some kinds of flux that are slightly conductive. Some are completely non-conductive. I think this one I just started using right now. The one I was using before this was just causing connections between them, so I had to clean my boards every time I was done soldering. Yeah, looks nice and clean. You can go ahead, give it a bit more of the toothbrush and scrub it off. Like there's some flux up there, you can see.